recording. So what we're going to do today is continue talking, hopefully, about the ideas behind kind of physical activity and how it relates to physical fitness, and then the interaction, especially of activity levels and overall health, right? And I don't know exactly how Dr. Vellers framed it on Monday, but I'll do just a little bit of review, and then I'll ask a couple of questions, and then we'll get into some new stuff. So obviously the point of class, the name of class is Principles of Health and Fitness, right? So as you can imagine, we're going to talk a lot about health. We're going to talk a lot about fitness, and we're going to talk in quite a bit of detail of the kind of interactions of those two things, right? So how do we define what healthy means? How do we define what fitness means? And then sort of as I move myself up and down on levels of fitness from being unfit to very, very fit in certain ways, is there some interaction of that with different sorts of disease states and pathologies and all of that? And of course, the answer is yes, there is. We know that. I think everybody can kind of assume that just from kind of the nature of things you've been exposed to in your life up until now. Okay, so we're going to start like this. So I'm going to say, Hensley, do you remember, and you're welcome to look back in your notes if you want, do you remember how we define fitness?
Physical fitness here. The ability to perform muscular work satisfactorily.
Okay. What does that mean to you? Like those are some big fancy words, and I wrote those and I borrowed it from the World Health Organization and all of those things. But if you had to explain what that means to, I don't know, maybe your roommate who's not an HES major or your parents or something, like, can you boil that down to kind of layman's terms for us?
Yeah, so I would say like muscular work is anything where you're using your muscles in your body satisfactorily, meaning correctly,
Okay.
to your best of your ability. Yeah.
Okay. Very good. We're gonna do a fun experiment. All right. So everybody that is able, okay, I want you to stand up. This is where we stand up. Everybody stand up. If you're in your PJs or something, that's okay. We're going to stand up. All right. Then I want you to just wave at us, like wave your hand at us. Just say hello. Okay. And then sit back down. Okay. You guys just demonstrated that you had a sufficient amount of physical fitness to be able to stand up and wave and then sit back down. Okay. So in many ways, and Hensley did a really, really nice job of kind of boiling this down. The idea of fitness is, can you actually perform some sort of physical task? Okay. That's the realm that we're going to look at. And so if you can stand up, that means you're fit enough to stand up. You may not be able to stand up 20 times consecutively, okay? Or you may not be able to stand up and jump and touch the ceiling, or you may not be fit enough to run a mile in 8 minutes or 6 minutes, or you may not be fit enough to squat 300 pounds or something of that nature, okay? So fitness is all about what the task is. It's all about the task. And as we move through class, what I hope you guys will gain an appreciation of is that the things that you all do in your everyday life that you take for granted, you all have, and most kind of younger, relatively healthy people, you guys have a certain innate level of fitness to do all of the things that you do every day, to take a shower, right? To get into and out of bed by yourself, to do crazy things that you never think about, like brush your teeth, to be able to carry groceries, to go up a flight of stairs, right? To sit down on the toilet and be able to stand back up without having anything to hold on to or something, okay? You all have, those are things that require a level of fitness. There's lots of people that do not have that level of fitness, especially as we age, especially as you have any sort of cardiovascular or muscular pathologies and things, you may lose your fitness to do those things, Okay. You guys probably always think of, because this is what makes the most sense to you, because you don't think about the stuff you do in your everyday life, is, well, how fit am I? Can I play basketball? Can I play golf? Can I run fast? Can I jump high? Right? You think about it in terms of sports and athletics and those things, which that's right, but that's way on the high end of fitness. Okay. And so we're going to go through and we're going to see that there are levels of fitness, that as fitness moves up, right, health is also going to tend to move up. Or what oftentimes happens is, as fitness begins to decline, then health is also going to decline in parallel with those kinds of things. Okay. Does that make sense, guys? Kind of as an overall kind of general concept, because we're going to talk about in the coming lectures muscular fitness. We're going to talk about cardiorespiratory fitness, and these are things like strength and ability to do push-ups and sit-ups, and we're going to talk about all the physiology that allows you to do those things. Okay. But it's not just, are you fit enough to do 10 push-ups, right? It's are you fit enough to do one? And that's going to be a thing that predicts kind of health. Okay. Everybody with me on that? Okay. Cool. All right. So there is a kind of related concept to all of this. Okay. So Abigail, do you remember how Dr. Vellers, or how we define something called physical activity? Do you remember what physical activity is or was?
Let me look at my notes really quick.
Perfect. Look. I like it.
Any bodily movement produced by the skeletal muscles that results in substantial increase in overall resting energy.
Exactly. Okay. Any bodily movement. Now, I will, if you guys can move without using your muscles, then we'd like to study you, right? But that muscles have one job. Okay. Muscles, one job is to generate force, and we use that force to try to produce movement. Okay. As we will see in the coming lectures, we'll get into all of the cellular level signals and mechanisms and things that allow muscles to generate force, but that's their job. We use our muscles to move. In order to do that, we have to generate force, and to generate that force, it's going to cost us energy. Okay. The more force that we do, the more force that your muscles generate, the more energy that they're going to use. Okay. So think about it this way. More force can mean like a higher maximal force. Okay. So if you lift 200 pounds versus lifting 100 pounds, that uses more energy. Or if you lift 100 pounds 10 times versus lifting it once, that's going to use more energy. Okay. So physical activity is anything. It's basically any movement where we're going to get a substantial increase above resting. So what you guys are going to do for me for Monday is you're going to keep a journal, and I'll assign this at the end of class, and I'll put a thing on Canvas for all this. You guys are going to keep a journal, and I'm going to ask you over the next 4 days. So on 2 weekdays and then 2 weekend days, you're going to keep a journal for me of everything that you do every day that you think is physical activity. Okay. We're going to keep track of all of this. Now, some of you may have, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, okay, how we quantify these things. Some of you guys may have an Apple Watch or a Fitbit watch or a Garmin watch or one of those crazy like ring things, Aura rings or something that you can wear. Is it called a Whoop or something like that? But it's one of those kind of tracking monitors that will keep track of your heart rate. It keeps track of your movements and those things, and it will spit out what it thinks your caloric expenditure is and how much activity you've got. We'll talk about those in a few slides, okay? But you guys are going to do this for me. I'm going to write down what's going on, all right? And so we're going to see things that maybe you think are physical activity, and we're going to see things that maybe you don't, that you don't ever think about, okay? So let me do this. Ray, are you putting like sugar in coffee?
Yes, I was putting a trivia into this. Yeah.
Okay. So Ray's putting sugar in his coffee. He's been standing. I can see him moving around a little bit there and doing those things. Now he's stirring his coffee. Ray, is that physical activity?
Yeah, I would say so.
I would say so too, right? So when we think of physical activity, do you guys think about like, oh, I made a cup of coffee, or I was mixing my coffee, right? Or I brushed my teeth, right? Or I took a shower right before I came on here. Like I was in the shower, I was washing, right? You're doing your hair, you're doing something like that. That's a bodily movement where it requires some level of energy to be expended above resting levels. Those are the things that all of that at some point will in fact add up. Okay. And so we need to kind of begin to wrap our head around how much are people moving, how much are they not moving. And what I think you guys are going to see is that you all are super active, but in comparison to, say, your parents or me or your grandparents, because many of you have to walk around to different classes, right? Like our classes in physical sciences. If you have a class over in our normal building, then we have to schlep our way all the way over to physical sciences, unless maybe you've got a fraternity brother or a sorority sister who I know we would never do anything that looks at all like hazing, but maybe they're gracious enough to like drop you off at the class and then come back and pick you up or something. But we've got to move around a lot. You guys are going to see that most people don't move that much. Like if it takes you 15 minutes to walk from our building over to physical sciences and then 15 minutes to walk back, you've already gotten 30 minutes of physical activity in a particular day. You've already, as we will ask here in the next sort of little thing, you've already gotten what you need for that day in theory to have some level of health improvements. Okay. So there's a special kind of physical activity. Okay. And that's exercise. Exercise is physical activity, but it's a subcategory of physical activity. All right. So let's try this. Michaela, do you remember, or did you guys, I think you guys should have talked about what makes exercise exercise? It is physical activity, but what separates it from other kinds of physical activity?
That it's a planned activity.
Okay. And what is our plan? Like what are we trying to get out of exercise that makes it unique to other sorts of physical activity? Did you guys talk about that? It's okay if Michaela's having difficulty locating it. Does anybody else want to chime in? Can you guys help Michaela out?
It's meant to improve one's physical fitness.
Perfect, TJ. Thank you. Perfect. Okay. The thing that makes exercise exercise and not just some other kind of form of physical activity is that you're doing it to improve your fitness levels. Okay. And so it is planned, as Michaela said, that's perfect, but it's also your goal is to get yourself to be, in theory, more fit. Okay. So my wife gets mad at me about all of this. I'm going to give you guys relationship advice on all of these kinds of things if you want we've been together. Let me think about this. So we've been together 21 and a half years, I guess, on all of this. She goes and says that she's going to exercise, and she really doesn't go and exercise. She goes and she gets physical activity because she goes and she walks, and she doesn't walk particularly fast. Although that's not 100% true. Sometimes she walks faster than I would like to walk, but she doesn't walk fast enough that it's probably going to actually improve her fitness levels. And so she gets fussy with me when I'm like, you're not really doing, it's good for her and it improves her health, but it doesn't actually make you more fit. So my advice to everyone is just shut up when people do those things. Don't point out those things to your significant other or your friends or whatever. Just applaud them that they're out and going for a walk or running or something else. We will talk about, I don't know if Dr. Veller's mentioned this at all on Monday, but one of my favorite things to do in class is something called bro science. And so we will do some bro science. We'll start the bro science on Monday. But it's kind of a thing where we talk about sort of weird things or myths that people have about exercise and physical activity. And I'm going to go and do this, and I'm going to get huge and jacked and buff, or I'm going to take this particular pre-workout supplement. We'll figure out why the really bros are always carrying around a jug of water. Like, what the hell is that for? What is that pink liquid they're drinking before they work out in their shaker bottles and those things? And why, to be honest, if any of you are taking a pre-workout right now, that Ray probably has the right of it. And I don't know if Ray made instant coffee or something, but it's probably less expensive than somebody's pre-workout, and it probably works just as well. on all of that. So we'll do some of that. So how much physical activity are we supposed to get? Okay, so we'll do that one next. Amelia, how you guys, I think, covered that there are some recommendations that if you can get this much of something, this much activity per week, that there will be these noticeable health improvements and increase in longevity and decreases in diseases for you. Do you remember what those numbers are?
150 minutes of moderate intensity every week, and then or 75 minutes of vigorous intensity activity week.
Okay, and there's one other piece of that often goes forgotten.
The 2 days of muscle strengthening that work all of the major muscle groups.
Perfect. Okay, 2 days of muscle strengthening. So 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity per week, or 75 minutes of vigorous. Okay, so that works out to about what, like 22 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity per day. Okay, or like 11 minutes or 10 3/4 minutes of vigorous intensity physical activity every day, and then 2 days of doing some kind of resistance training. If you do that, then your life gets better, right? Your risk of cardiovascular disease goes down, your risk of type 2 diabetes goes down, your risk of certain cancers goes down, your risk of low back pain, a whole host of things goes down. Okay, so to me, the big question, and I should point this out right now, I'm going to ask you to verbatim give that back to me on the first test. Probably going to ask you to give it back to me on the second test. Probably going to ask you to give that back to me on the final. We're probably going to ask you to give that back to us on the exit exam when you are a senior. If you take basically nothing else away from class, I would like for you to know those exact numbers, okay? Those exact numbers. Uh-oh. Sophie, are you drinking pre-workout? What is that?
It's just Crystal Light.
Just Crystal Light. Okay. That's all right. That's all right. I see it. It's the colored liquid. I thought we were gonna have a thing there. Okay. No worries. All right. So you guys need to know that. So let me ask the question this way. Mackenzie, what makes something moderate intensity? How do we know if it's moderate intensity? Because I think this is the crux of so many things. What is moderate? What is vigorous? How do you know if you need 150 or if you need 75? Like, where have those things come from? So what do you think is a moderate intensity activity, and what makes it moderate?
Sorry, can I look through my notes? Is it in the notes?
I'm not sure if it's in the notes. It may be things that we're going to kind of get at, but just throw something out to me. Like, what do you think would be a moderate intensity activity?
Would like a moderate intensity activity be like jogging?
Jogging? Okay. You guys will learn. Running is good for us. I say that very begrudgingly because I hate it. It's never fun for me. I don't like running. But what do you guys think? You guys think that running or jogging is moderate intensity activity? So if you need 150 minutes of running? So let me go backwards. We'll ask this in a different way. Kylie, are you in a place where you can chat? I know you've taken your mask off. I didn't know if you were in a place where it was probably unsafe to do so.
I'm in the biz, but I can talk.
You're in the biz. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So Kylie, do you remember what we talked about like 10 minutes ago? Like, what makes something physical activity? What's the key little thing? It's muscular work that does what?
Let me see. Any bodily movement produced by the skeletal muscle that results in a substantial increase over resting energy expenditure.
Expenditure. Perfect. Okay.
Expenditure.
So, excellent. Thank you. So here's the thing. We'll come back to Mackenzie on all of this. Okay. When you jog, okay, your body weighs a certain amount. And when you're going to jog, you have to generate a certain amount of force from your muscles, okay, that requires a certain amount of energy expenditure to allow you to jog. it requires more force to jog than it does to walk. Okay. You weigh the same. Okay. Whether you're walking or you're jogging. So if you're going to jog and you're going to go faster, then you have to generate more force. Running, as opposed to jogging, or running quickly, sprinting, takes even more force than jogging does. Okay. So the way that we're going to try to parse out what is light, what is moderate, and what is vigorous intensity physical activity, and what sorts of movements fall into those ranges is all going to come back to energy expenditure. Okay. There's a range of energy expenditure above rest that qualifies as light intensity. Okay. Brushing your teeth, probably light, unless you're super sort of getting after it, brushing your teeth. Okay. There is a range of energy expenditures that qualify as moderate. Okay. I will tell you guys that McKinsey probably undershot on us just a little bit. Jogging for most people, unless you're in super duper good shape, is probably vigorous intensity activity. So you only need 75 minutes of jogging. Okay. You need 11 minutes of jogging a day, even though it sucks to do all of that if you're me, and you can meet your guidelines. Okay. Walking at a kind of reasonable clip is considered moderate. Light intensity things might be you're just kind of puttering around at your house. Maybe you're vacuuming, maybe you're making dinner, you're brushing your teeth. You're just kind of doing things that aren't rest, but they're not really requiring a huge amount. And we'll get into in the next few slides kind of what those ranges actually are, how we quantify what those ranges are. Okay. But that's how we're going to divide this all out. It's all going to come back to energy expenditure. Okay. There is some science behind all of these kinds of things. And that's going to help us to understand why we need to do X amount of walking, X amount of this. Okay. So next thing that I want you guys to do is we're going to do a little thought experiment, and we probably won't turn this one in. I'll put you guys into some breakout rooms in a few minutes, and we'll do another in-class assignment to turn in for some credit for you guys being here today, which I appreciate. So everybody think about what you've done in the last week. Okay. The last week. I want you to think about, have you gotten 75 minutes, okay, of at least jogging intensity? And if you're jogging, we're probably going to call that exercise, right? Have you gotten at least 75 minutes of jogging level intensity exercise? Or it could be even more than that. Okay. And then conversely, do you think you've gotten 150 minutes of just kind of walking around or something in that range? Maybe you have a job where you're a hostess, or you wait tables, or you have a job where, I don't know, you're throwing boxes in the Amazon warehouse, or you work at a PT clinic, you're a PT tech and you're on your feet and doing those kinds of things, right? So everybody just take a minute or so while I go to try to find my Diet Mountain Dew and think about that. Okay. Have you gotten that? And what we're going to do then is we're going to see how many of you guys think that you've actually done this. I'll be right back. All right. Okay, cheers. I'm back. All right. So let's sort of roll our way through here. All right, and I'm going to count as we go. So it says we got 26 participants. Let me see if I can widen all of this out and see all of the rest of you guys. So we got 26 of you guys. All right, so I'm just going to read across on my thing, and we're going to go through and see how many of you guys actually think you did this. Julianne, are you a yes or a no on getting either of those two things?
Yes.
Okay, so we got one. Carmela.
Yes.
Carmela's a yes. Okay. Kyle.
Yes.
Kyle's a yes. Okay. Mackenzie.
Yes.
Mackenzie's a yes. TJ.
Yes.
TJ's a yes. Okay. Sophie.
Yes.
Abigail.
Yes.
Okay. Hensley. Hensley's moved locations on us.
Yes.
Okay. Kinsey.
No, but it's only Wednesday.
Okay. Okay. If you went back to last Wednesday, like if you went all the way back a whole week, doesn't just have to be like this week, but that's okay. All right. So you can think about that.
Yes,
We'll
for
come back.
last week. Yes, for last week, not this week.
Okay. Perfect. Amanda.
Yeah.
Amanda's a yes. Jeremy.
Yes.
Okay. Paige.
Yes.
Katie.
Yes.
Okay. I should have asked this question differently. Amelia.
Yes.
Okay. Evan.
Yes.
Michaela.
Yes.
Okay. Geraldine.
Yes.
Jeff.
Yes.
Cool. Kylie.
Yes.
Kylie's a yes. Madison.
No.
Okay. Ray.
Yes.
Okay. Megan, are you there? Would you see the pictures on your wall?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. That's okay. Megan's hanging out in bed. I think we all can relate to that. Casey.
No.
Okay, so we got two no's. Cade.
Yes.
Okay, Cade's a yes. Kara.
Yeah.
Kara's a yes. All right. And then wait, now TJ's down at the bottom. Wait, TJ, did we already ask you? Did you somehow get stuck on the bottom?
Yeah, I'm a yes.
Okay, TJ's a yes. Okay. So let me do this. There's 20. I guess I'll have to put myself in there. And my thing is it's going to be yes, but it's iffy. Mostly just because I have to chase a toddler around. If it wasn't for that, the answer would be a definite no. So we had two people that were no's. I probably should have just started the thing and just said, hey, who didn't meet it? That might have been better. But 24 out of 26 is 92%. Okay, 92%. So the other statistics would tell us that if we look at adults who are 18 and over, that depending upon how we define things, if we just do the 150 or 75 minutes of things, that about somewhere between 50 and 60% of the 18 to 25-year-old population do not get that. Okay. If we add the resistance training in, somebody just wave at me if you also did 2 days of like some kind of weight or strength training. Just wave at us. All right. So maybe about half it looks like on all of that. So we lose some people if we do that. Okay. So about 70%-ish of all adults do not meet the aerobic and resistance training portion of those guidelines. Okay. And then depending upon what year we take the survey and kind of how we slice the data out, somewhere between 50 and 60% don't meet the 150 or 75. Okay. So imagine this. We can do some math. I know you guys are HES majors. We don't really think that maybe math is that important on all of those things, but I love math because it always makes some sense. And you guys are very typical. 90, especially as HES measures, 95% of you guys meet the guidelines pretty much every week. Okay. Imagine how many people that are my age or your parents' age or older have to not meet the guidelines to essentially wash out the effects of everyone that is y'all's age. Okay. So if we start moving the age ranges on all of that, as we get into people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, then the numbers really, really begin to plummet. Okay. The data tells us you guys are as active right now as you are likely to ever be in your entire life. In that way, you're probably the healthiest you're ever likely to be. The converse is you probably also are able to eat as terribly right now as you would like, and everything is still going to be okay. I can assure you guys that the sort of dip in your metabolism and other things, it's coming. It's a sad story. I am a cautionary tale that we will talk about as we move forward. Okay, so that's kind of where we are. All right, that's the state of everything. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the slides. We'll talk a little about why being inactive is potentially so bad. Okay, and then we'll come back and do a little bit about how we can try to quantify how physically active you are, why having an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or something is or is not kind of a useful thing. Okay, so did you guys talk about this? Did you guys do this slide with Dr. Vellers? Or do I need to, this, she just said that she got to here, and she didn't say if that meant that y'all stopped here or you actually talked about it. Somebody help me out.
I don't think we did this slide.
We didn't do this.
I don't think we did this one. Oh.
Okay, so if I'd been there on Monday, I would have said basically the theme of class is we are not active enough, and we are obese as a country and as a people, and it's literally killing us. Okay, so physical inactivity is the second leading preventable cause of death in the U.S. Although we can in the last couple of years we can talk our way around COVID and some of those kinds of things, and the extent to which that is or is not preventable in its interactions. But outside of smoking, being inactive is like the worst thing that you can do for your overall health for the rest of your life. And we've done a reasonable job of at least advertising that smoking is bad for us. We don't do nearly as good with the other things. So what scientists have been working on for 20, 30, 35, 40 years is why is a lack of activity, why is not moving around so bad for us? Okay, what does it do to our internal physiology? Okay, that puts us at a greater risk of heart disease, of type 2 diabetes, especially of certain kinds of cancer, osteoporosis, all of these other kinds of things that are the actual things that end up killing us, right? Being inactive doesn't kill you, but it increases your risk of certain diseases, and those diseases are what kills you. So we think that part of this, our best guess is that this is all going to have come out of evolution, genetics, and partially the Industrial Revolution, but really the advent of computers and the internet and all of kind of the increase in technology that has changed the way we work and we do things now. Okay, so I'm sure that most of you guys at least have some passing familiarity with genetics, right? From intro to bio or intro to zoo, a little bit of an idea about sort of evolution, and I hope that we can maybe at least all agree whether you think that sort of evolution does actually occur, whether kind of how we got started in the midst of all of that is certainly something that we could have an interesting conversation about, but that at least we are in fact evolving sort of as a species in these kinds of things. Okay, so the current thought is, if you guys think back, let's just say, I don't know, 10,000 years ago. Okay, Casey, what do you think we did as humans 10,000 years ago? Where do we live? What were we doing on a day-to-day basis? Like what all was happening?
We were probably like not living in houses with all the utilities we have today. Okay. And it was probably like hunting, gathering, growing your food.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. 10,000 years ago, Casey probably would have gotten up this morning and had to go, like, if you wanted to eat, you had to go probably find something, right? Dig up some, find some kind of vegetables or something. Or maybe Casey would have to go out and try to fish or hunt or do something. To be honest, if we were in sort of this area, right, of the world, I don't know enough. My guess is that Casey would have stayed home, and maybe if Cade was her sort of partner or something in the midst of this, that Cade would have gone out to hunt. I don't really know, deer or bison or who knows, right? But we were hunter-gatherers. You couldn't just get on your phone and have DoorDash bring you Chick-fil-A when you wanted it or something like all of that, okay? You couldn't just run down to the neighborhood market and get some groceries and all of that. So our way of being able to survive involved us having to be very, very physically active. Okay. You had to move around a lot to hunt, to gather, to exist. Okay. So what we think happened is that if you look at our human genome, if you look at the way our genes work in response to being more active and how they respond to getting food, what it turns out is that our genes are really, really good at letting us, when we eat a meal, at promoting storage of the energy from that meal. Okay. And we think some of that was born out of the fact that when you were hunter-gatherers, maybe Casey couldn't find anything to eat today, which means she didn't get to eat. Okay. And so, but if she finds something tomorrow, she gets to eat. You better eat a bunch. You better store it so that if you go through another day or two where you can't find things, you've got some sort of stored energy to draw upon to allow you to continue to hunt and to gather and to exist. So our genes are set up to be really, really good at when you eat a cheeseburger, it wants to immediately use that to replenish some broken down energy in your muscles. And then it wants to store the rest of it. So in case you don't get to eat tomorrow. Okay. And so what we think has happened is that with the Industrial Revolution and then with the technology revolution, we have basically taken a lot of the physical activity out of a lot of our jobs, right? If you look even, I don't know, 100 years ago or 70 years ago, the most common job in Oklahoma was probably farming or working in a factory of some sort, right? Where you're doing, my grandfather was the dairy farmer. My mom's dad was a dairy farmer in Kansas. And that shit is work, right? Like you are up, you are moving, you are doing things, you're lifting things. Like that is work. Okay. It is not this sort of fancy pants, soft, sit behind a desk thing that I do all the time now with a bunch of different things. Okay. And so, but that's what people do now. A lot of jobs, are going to be things where you sit and you work on a computer and you work remotely. And there are lots of advantages to all of that, but then some of the disadvantages, this doesn't work well with our genes. Also, and we do not want to make light of food insecurity or anything else, but for a sizable segment of the population, we have access to more food, to a wider variety of food. We also have a lot of access to very calorically dense food, right? 10,000 years ago, there weren't chicken nuggets. We weren't frying things and doing all of that, right? There weren't Twinkies, right? And those kinds of things that are very calorically dense. And so what happens now is we tend to eat more, but really what we do is we move less. There's some interesting data that's just come out in the last month that caloric intake has not actually increased that much over the last, say, 40 or 50 years. But the thing is that our daily physical activity has gone down a huge amount. So we're using less of the energy that we're actually taking in, and our genes aren't set up for that. And so we store more. We're really good at storing, and that leads to an increase in adiposity. And we think a lot of that adiposity in combination with not moving is one of the things that causes so many of our health problems. I will show you guys some data. You may have already seen it the other day, that basically, regardless of your weight status, regardless of how much you weigh, if you are normal weight, overweight, obese by BMI, morbidly obese, if you meet the physical activity guidelines, then you are going to be, quote unquote, healthier than someone that weighs less than you that does not meet the physical activity guidelines. So being active trumps so many things, and we don't talk about that enough. Okay, so we're going to kind of transition away from this. We're going to talk a little bit more about how we quantify and how we measure physical activity, because I think this is a thing that's really important, and it's a thing that we kind of don't we don't talk enough about. And we've got a lot of really cool technology that is reasonably inexpensive now that you guys have access to. And so we need to talk about how we can or should use that stuff to our advantage. Okay, so everybody remember. Okay, I'm going to harp on this. You guys will find that I do this a lot. When things are important, I'm going to say it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, and remind you over and over and over again that I think that this is the thing. Okay, that's usually a good sign there's going to be test questions about it and all of that. So physical activity, right, is mainly quantified by increases in energy expenditure. Okay, increases in energy expenditure. So let me look at who is on here. Just on my screen right now. TJ, do you by chance have some sort of watch or some sort of movement monitoring device? Do you own one?
Yeah, I have an Apple Watch.
You have an Apple Watch. Okay. So do you have any idea how did your Apple Watch, like you could look on there and it would tell you how many calories you expended in a day, or if you tell it you're going to go for a bike ride, or you're going to do something, right? Like it will spit out how many calories it thinks you expended doing all of that. And my question is, how the hell does it do that? How does it know? What is it doing to make that estimation?
Like measuring your heart rate to see
okay
how fast it's beating, how many calories you're burning at a time, I guess.
Okay. Does it do anything else? It does measure your heart rate, absolutely. Does it do anything else? Because what if I just sit here and I watch a scary movie and my heart rate goes up?
It measures movement.
It measures movement. Okay, thank you, Madison. So we take the combination of those two things, right? We know that TJ covered X amount of ground, right? We can talk about how it measures movement and how it measures heart rate and the supposed accuracy of either of those kinds of things, right? But what a lot of things are going to do, and thank you guys for sharing that, okay? What a lot of things are going to do outside of the first kind of 3 things on here that are much more expensive is they're not going to actually measure energy expenditure. They're going to estimate it based upon, we know that when energy expenditure goes up, that results in changes in other markers, other physiological parameters. And if we measure those things, because it's easier to do that, then we're going to make some assumptions on how tall is TJ, how old is TJ, how much does he weigh, et cetera, right? And use all of that information to make a best guess and estimate what's going to happen. And there's going to be a little bit of wiggle room in all of those. Okay. But so the best way to quantify physical activity means that I need to have you do something and I need to be able to measure how much energy you're expending directly. Okay. So the single most accurate way to do that is something that is called direct calorimetry. Okay. Direct calorimetry. We measure energy expenditure as calories expended or calories burned. Okay. And we'll do some stuff on metabolism and we'll talk about where this comes from. But basically, food has calories and we know how many calories are in food by we light it on fire and we see how much heat it gives off when we burn it. Okay. That's how we do all of this. Well, your body works in the same way. If you look at a metabolic equation, we are very, very inefficient. And one of the things that we give off when you use more energy is heat. Okay. You give off heat. So if you've ever, like, if you're going to go outside, you're going to go run today, right? It's pretty chilly out. You run, you increase your energy expenditure, you start giving off heat, right? And you sit down next to someone outside and it's cold. They can feel the heat sort of coming off of you, right? If they touch you, they can feel that you're warmer than the atmospheric air or that they are. Okay, we can put you in a device. Most of the time, direct calorimeters they're small rooms. We put you in a room, okay, and we measure how much heat you give off. And the way that we do this is in the walls of the room. Do I have a picture? Yeah. In the walls of the room, there's all of these little copper pipes, and through those pipes, they run water. And we know the temperature of the water in those pipes, okay? And the walls are very, very thin. You give off heat. That heat moves through the walls. It goes into those pipes and it heats up the water. And it heats it up a tiny, tiny amount, okay? But we know, if we know how much water is circulating and we know how much the temperature goes up, then we can calculate how much heat you're giving off to raise X amount of water a certain amount, okay? And so we know the specific heat of water. We know how many calories it takes to raise 1 milliliter of water, 1 degree centigrade in all of these things. Okay. So we put you in these chambers, you do all of this, we measure these things. As far as I'm aware, there is not a direct calorimeter anywhere in the state of Oklahoma. The closest one that I know of, I'm sure they have one at UT Southwestern in Dallas. I know they have one at the Med Center in Little Rock, Arkansas, and they're very, very expensive, several $100,000 to make all of these things. They have a really cool one in Germany that is a mock-up of the International Space Station. And they will put people that want to be astronauts, they'll put them in there for like 6 weeks at a time, knowing that your energy expenditure is going to be different because you're not in a weightless environment, but they put them in there to make sure that people aren't going to freak the hell out by being locked up in several metal tubes for months and months on end. But we can do all of this. Okay, very, very accurate. The problem is it's really expensive, and we don't get very good ways of you wear your Apple Watch all day. We can quantify whatever it is that you're doing during your day. If we put you in this room, you're either going to sit there or you're going to have to exercise in a manner that we tell you or something else. We can't really measure what happens in the real world in a direct calorimeter very well. Okay. But it's very, very, very accurate. And so some of the things that we can do is we can have you do activities in a direct calorimeter. We can then measure your change in heart rate, measure some other things, and we can use those things to try to kind of validate our equations to make sure that stuff is working. Okay. Probably the next most accurate way of measuring energy expenditure is something called doubly labeled water. What we do with doubly labeled water, this is something called deuterium dilution. This is radioactive water. Okay, now it's not harmfully radioactive, but it's radioactive water. And we give some to you and you drink it, and you drink X amount over several days, and then we collect your urine. Okay, we collect your urine over time, and we see how much of the radioactive isotopes are getting released out in your urine. That tells us about your metabolism, and we can calculate energy expenditure from doing all of this. And we have to closely monitor fluid intake, fluid output, and we got to track you for a couple of weeks. So there were some studies when I was a grad student that did this, and it cost about $100 a person to get the doubly labeled water that we would use for the 2 weeks. One of the places that they find the doubly labeled water is when they drill for oil and natural gas. And so the oil companies and the natural gas companies have sort of bought up all of this, and they've raised the price tremendously. I know we're all surprised by that. And so now it's like $1,000. So it's become even more expensive and kind of less accessible. Okay. But when you do this, we can much more easily simulate real world things. I can give Casey some radioactive water. We can make her drink it, and we can just she can follow herself around and collect her urine over a couple of weeks, and we can do it this way. Okay. A more feasible way than all of that is the thing that we can do, that we do in our lab a fair amount. We do it. You guys will do it in exercise physiology lab. If you take that class with Dr. Pereira, is something called indirect calorimetry. Okay. So anybody remember, if you look at a metabolic equation, that you take glucose and you add oxygen, right, to it, you make water and CO2 and heat on the back end. And so what we do with indirect calorimetry is we put you in a mask or this mouthpiece of some sort. And you can see one of my former students here on an exercise bike. We've got him hooked up. And what we are doing is we are collecting all of the gases, all the air that they expire out. And what we know is that in regular room air, there's a certain amount of oxygen and a certain amount of CO2. We collect the air that you breathe out, and we test it to see how much oxygen and how much CO2 is in the air that you're breathing out. And what we're primarily interested in is how much extra CO2 is there. And so we know through our metabolic equations that as we increase metabolism, you breathe off more and more CO2. CO2 is the molecule that drives an increase in breathing anyway. And so that's why when you start to exercise and you do more energy expenditure, you breathe more forcefully, more deeply, and more frequently. We collect this CO2, and then we can use that to back calculate how many calories you're expending. Okay, quite accurate to do all of this. Okay, not nearly as expensive. One of these metabolic carts like we have, they cost about $15,000. They make some that are portable. They fit in like a fanny pack or a little backpack. And we could put one on Madison and make her walk around campus all day, go through all of her daily life. And we could do this, and we could get a very, very accurate measure of this. But again, it's somewhat difficult to simulate real world settings with this, because my guess is that Madison is not going to want to wear a backpack and a mask and do all of these things. So people are going to ask a lot of questions over the course of the day if you're doing something like this. Okay. If you guys want to see how these things go, a couple of my graduate students are going to be doing some studies where this is going to be a part of it over the course of the semester, and they may come and try to recruit you guys. But if you're interested in this, it's very, very cool. We can tell some additional things from this. We can know how much of your energy you're getting from carbohydrates, how much you're getting from fat, and again, we can kind of get some other kind of cool info from these kinds of things. Okay, so now let's talk about the much more feasible things that we have going on here. Okay. So let me just check this one thing. Okay. So the other ways that we can try to estimate things. All right. So with the other ones, we're doing much closer to kind of real calculations and a real quantification. With heart rate and measuring movement, like how many steps you're taking or something, or even just asking you kind of what it is that you have done, we're making some big assumptions. Okay. So the advantage of using heart rate is that we know there's a very strong positive relationship. Anybody had stats? So if I say there's a correlation, you guys know what the hell I'm talking about? Anybody had stats? A few of you have. Okay. So when we talk about correlations, what we mean essentially is that statistically, as one variable changes, another variable changes either up or down in concert with all of that. And if they move very closely with each other, we say that there's a strong relationship. And so with heart rate, if I ask one of you to stand up and start doing some jumping jacks, and we measure the changes in your heart rate that are going on your Apple Watch or something while you're doing that, then what's going to happen is the amount of force that you generate to do your jumping jacks is going to require a certain amount of energy. In order to get that energy, your heart rate has to go up because we need the cardiovascular system to circulate more blood, to bring more oxygen and more glucose and more fat to those muscles to make energy. And so as expenditure goes up, cardiovascular system function also is going to increase. And so heart rate goes up. So these two things track very, very closely. And so what that means is, especially when you're doing things like walking or cycling or jogging, or you're on the elliptical, or you're doing the Stairmaster, even if you're doing the Stairmaster going like sideways and backwards, which I see a lot of, we're going to talk about that in bro science sometime soon, then your heart rate goes up. That gives us a reasonable, if we know sort of how much you weigh and those kind of things, we can use your heart rate to give us a reasonable expectation on those kinds of things. And the technology is such that we can now measure this relatively cheaply, relatively accurately. And so you can put your watch on and you can just go about your day and do whatever it is that you're doing. And then it saves it, it remembers it, and we can come back on the back end and we can look at these kinds of things. Okay. The disadvantages of heart rate, and some of this has been sort of, we've resolved this with some of our newer kind of movement sensors, is that it's not an actual measure of energy expenditure. It's a measure of what's happening in your cardiovascular system. And there's lots of other things that can influence that. Okay. If you're stressed, your heart rate goes up. If you drink too much caffeine, your heart rate goes up. I don't know, if you do meth, if you do cocaine, some other kind of stimulant, right? It goes up. If you have some marijuana gummies, it's probably going to go down in those kinds of ways. If you drink alcohol, those are central nervous system depressants, it may go down. So there's a lot of things that can affect heart rate, okay? It changes quickly, and so because of that, we have to measure it over a long period of time, and that used to be much more difficult. In the last, say, 5 years or so, our ability to make lots of measurements from watches or things you wear on your finger or on your chest and have those kind of saved in real time has gone up dramatically. Okay. And so we've got to just be careful about those kinds of things. So if you look at, like, if I pull up on on your phone, if you pull up, like, you track your heart rate over the course of a given day, right, then your Apple Watch sort of shows you this readout across all day, and it will try to tell you what your resting rate was. It'll tell you what your peak was, but you can watch it as it makes all of these measures, and it does it every couple of seconds, and so it just sort of averages those things out. But if you just made one measure at one point in time, another measure at another point in time, then it can get off a little bit. Okay, so again, the other things that we've used and this works best if you use it with a heart rate monitor, is either counting steps or counting what we call accelerations. Okay, and the Apple Watches and things also use GPS, which in some ways is maybe even more accurate. But there are things called accelerometers, and when you wear them, the accelerometer, as you move, you wear it on your hip or your ankle or your wrist. As you move, it senses that movement in 3 dimensions, and it calculates from all of that. How far are you stepping? How fast are you stepping? Pedometers, you wear them on your hip. They just count the number of steps. And we use this to try to back calculate how much distance are you covering. Did you go a mile? Did you go 2 miles? Did you go 100 meters or something like that? And so if we know distance covered and we know your heart rate over that particular distance, then we can calculate how much work you did, and we can calculate how much energy it took for you to do that particular amount of work. So that's kind of an interesting thing. We're going to use an app in one of our labs where we're going to use your phone as a movement sensor. We're going to track you on GPS on your phone to have you go, and we're going to see how much distance you can cover in 6 minutes when you're walking. And if you want to get your heart rate during that will also be great. But we're going to track that and use that to estimate some levels of fitness. Okay. And so we've seen a lot of increases in all of this. And so I just want you guys to understand and be in some ways informed consumers of, hey, I have this fancy watch or this app on my phone that measures this or it measures that. It tells me this, it tells me that. What's it actually doing? And then when it gives you calories expended, why is it wrong? Okay. They're all going to be a little bit wrong. Apple Watches, there's been a lot of research. Apple Watches tend to overestimate. The Fitbit watches are a little better. At least the last version of them are a little bit better. I haven't seen data on the newest version of the Apple Watch, but the Apple Watch tends to overestimate distance covered, and therefore it also tends to overestimate caloric expenditure. It makes people feel better about themselves, which is probably a good thing. But then if you're like me, you're like, ooh, I burned 700 calories. I'm going to go eat more in the midst of all of that. Okay. So here were some things, a little bit of data on all of that, and I will try to put all of this. I'll try to put all of this into context for you guys in a lot of things. I'll show a lot of data. Okay, here is an actual peer-reviewed scientific article where people looked at this. And so what I want you guys to understand, though, is that one study does not necessarily mean that this is the only thing that's out there. What this tells us is, hey, this is one study that did this. Hopefully then there will be more studies. And if you've got 3 or 4 or 10 or 20 studies all looking at the same thing, you can look at all of them together and say, hey, across all of these things, it looks like this is what's happening. And we can draw some more conclusions. We have to be really careful about drawing conclusions from one study only. Excuse me. Which has been a big problem with all of our stuff about COVID, is that we don't know anything, or we didn't know anything. And as new studies come out, they don't always agree with each other. And so it's hard for us to make the best and most informed scientific decisions. And we end up changing our mind as we get new data. And that creates some kind of messaging problems and issues as we do all of that. Okay. But here's one on the accuracy. So this is Apple Series 1, a Fitbit Charge, right? And then another one called a Life Track. And they were comparing the kind of estimates of energy expenditure on this to having a person walking or jogging on the treadmill doing indirect calorimetry. So we're collecting the gases that they're breathing. And so what I want you guys to see basically on all of this was that they were sort of all going to tend in some ways, right, to have some bias in them. They're all off by a little bit in sort of the midst of these things. And they all tend to kind of overestimate a little bit. And I apologize. It looked like I'm sorry, it was not the Apple Watch. It was the Fitbit that when this particular study, especially during lower intensity activities, tended to overestimate energy expenditure in comparison. Okay, so that's the Apple Series 1. We're on like 5 or 6 or 7 or something now on those kinds of things. So just some stuff to kind of keep in mind. Okay, so the last thing is probably the most inaccurate way to do all of this, but this is what I'm going to ask you guys to do for Monday. Okay, it's called self-report. I just ask you questions. Okay, and I say, hey, how much activity did you guys have? Write down what it is that you've done. Think back what you've done over the last week or the last month or the last 6 months or something, and tell me whatever it is that you've done. Okay, so we'll do a fun exercise on all of this. Jeff, do you remember, Jeff, how much you exercised 4 weeks ago? So today is January the 26th. Do you remember how much you exercised the day after Christmas?
No.
Maybe because it's the day after Christmas, you might have something. But if I just said like, hey, on November 26th, do you remember how much you did? If you're like me, I don't remember what I did yesterday, much less anything else, right? So if I told you, hey, in a normal thing for the last 6 months, how much activity do you get in a given week? Right? That's tough, right? It's tough. Now, if I say, hey, remember what you did yesterday? Okay, maybe. Maybe do you remember what you did, Mackenzie, a week ago? Right? On Wednesday of last week, maybe we got a chance. Okay. But that is the problem with using self-report. If people aren't doing it in real time, which is what I'm going to ask you guys to try to do over the course of the next 4 days, is you can say, okay, Kylie, at the end of every day, write down whatever it is that you've done because it's much more fresh in your mind. You can try to remember what that's going to be. Okay. Hey, I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this. But if I just say, hey, do you remember what you did at 10 o'clock in the morning, 2 Tuesdays ago? Everyone's like, I don't have a damn clue what's going on. And so that's why self-report is better than nothing, but there's lots of errors. People don't mean to be inaccurate. They're likely not going to lie to us on purpose. Okay. But they just may not remember. And there may be a little bit of bias if they know what you're saying. They may want to. Some of you guys may or may not have thought as you were going through, oh God, everybody in class is saying that they're meeting the guidelines. I don't want to be the one person that says I'm not getting enough exercise in the midst of all of us. That would certainly have occurred to me, but I have an anxiety disorder and I'm very worried about what other people think about me all the time. Hopefully most of you are like my wife and are just like, I don't care. But these are things we have to consider. Okay. And this is in some ways why having a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or even an app on your phone where you can like write down what you did when you were exercising, or maybe you go to CrossFit or Orange Theory or some other place where you work out and they give you, right, like you go and they give you some kind of like sort of printout of things on an app after you've already been there. And that way you can jog your memory and you can go back and you can look at those kinds of things. Okay. So we just need to keep all of that in mind, that that's how we're going to try to measure and quantify physical activity. Okay. So the other thing that we're going to have to do, and this is what I'm going to have you guys try to really be careful and thoughtful about over the next few days. When we do self-report, it's not enough, okay, to very simply say, well, what did you do? Did you go exercise? We need to know, were you walking? Were you jogging? Were you on the elliptical? Okay. Did you go to F45 class, which looks terrible? If anybody's ever done that or kind of wandered by over in the Huff when they're having F45 class, that just looks awful. Okay. I'm sure it's great for you, but what were you doing? How long did you do it, right? Were you doing 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes? And then what was the intensity? We need to know, was it light? Was it moderate? Was it vigorous, right? Okay, well, I ran on the treadmill at X number of miles an hour for this long or something like all of that, okay? We need to know those kinds of things. And so when you do the self-report correctly, we have to be able to prompt people to collect the data in sort of a in a reasonable manner. And so there are things, there's some approved questionnaires for this. My capstone groups use them a lot. So any of you guys that have me for capstone at some point, or you're going to have to do your capstone, there's a thing called the International Physical Activity Questionnaire, but there are prompts and it will say, think about over the last 7 weekdays, how many times you did light intensity activities. And then it gives you a big ass list of these things might include walking slowly, cooking dinner, brushing your teeth, right? It gives you this big list of all of this to try to jog people's memory of common things that they're going to do. Okay. So we did this, we just got a couple of things. I've got a couple of things left here. So let's do this, okay? Given where we are, we will do this every day in class, okay? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start recording again. I'm going to figure out how to squish down. No, that's not what I want. Oh, I got to share my screen. See, I do Zoom so infrequently now. All right. So I'm going to talk now very quickly about, we're going to kind of finish off talking about how we're going to decide, like what are the energy expenditure cutoffs for us to decide what is light intensity, what is moderate, and what is vigorous. And in order to do this, I have to introduce a couple of other concepts that we're going to come back to in much more detail in about a month or so in class when we get into metabolism. So I apologize. I think this stuff needs to be mentioned here, but for it to really, really make sense, we'll come back and revisit it again and kind of try to emphasize stuff when we do metabolism, okay? So when we want to define an exercise intensity, okay, Kinsey's going to go run, and we want to know when Kinsey goes to run at 7 miles an hour or something like that, what is that intensity for Kinsey, and how does that compare to the same exact activity, to Casey going to run? I apologize, you guys are right on the top of my screen here. Casey going to run for the same distance, also at 7 miles an hour, okay? And so we would define it by how much their energy expenditure goes up relative to rest, okay? And so one of the things that we're going to do when we look at intensity is we're going to try to define it from an energy expenditure standpoint as a percentage. The best way is a percentage of something called your VO2 max, okay? And so if any of you guys have had like personal training class or something, you may have talked about VO2 max previously, but VO2 max, the VO2 stands for the volume of oxygen, okay? And so VO2 max represents the maximum volume of oxygen that your muscles you can bring into your body from the air, that you can get to your muscles with your circulatory or cardiovascular system, and that the muscles can use in their mitochondria to make ATP. So all of us have some top end sort of number. This is how much energy our muscles can make using aerobic metabolism, using oxygen and breaking down, right, protein or carbohydrates or fat to make ATP, okay? This VO2 max measure, okay, this is going to be our gold standard measure of what we call your aerobic or cardiorespiratory fitness, okay? Because this number depends upon lung function, it depends upon cardiovascular system function, it depends upon how many blood vessels and arteries you have, it depends upon how many mitochondria you have in your muscles, it depends upon a whole wide range of things, okay? But the higher your VO2 max, the more energy you can make aerobically. And in general, that means you can run at a faster pace or cycle at a higher work output for a longer period of time. This is one of the best ways for us to try to estimate who's going to be arguably one of the best endurance athletes in our class or in a group of people, okay? And so the best way to define whether or not running at 7 miles an hour is light or moderate or vigorous intensity activity for, say, Kinsey or Casey is we need to know relative to their maximal ability to make energy, okay, aerobically, when they run at 7 miles an hour, how much energy does that cost? What percentage of their max is, if your max is here, running at 7 is going to be at half of that number or 3/4 of that number. Okay, and we're going to say, okay, for Kinsey, it's 60% of her VO2 max to run at 7 miles an hour. For Casey, it's at 80% of her VO2 max. Okay, and so that's how we want to try to define intensity. It's very person dependent in some ways. Okay. And if the more fit you are, the higher your VO2 max, then the faster you can run, or the more kind of energy you've got to be able to expend, and from a work standpoint, in order to get to moderate or get to vigorous. Okay. So don't worry about what VO2 reserve is. We'll talk a little bit about this later on. I just kind of borrowed this slide so I can use it again. The other way that we do things, and this is in some ways how your watches are going to function, is that we look at a percentage of either heart rate max or what we call heart rate reserve. In addition to having a maximal kind of metabolic rate, part of that maximum metabolic rate is determined by what your maximal cardiac output is. And you guys may or may not remember from human phys, cardiac output is stroke volume, which is the number of times, the amount of blood that comes out of your heart every time the left ventricle contracts, multiplied by how many times it contracts in a given minute. So your heart rate. All of you have a maximal heart rate. It's usually dependent upon age. So in most of you guys, it's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 beats per minute. And so what we know is that, especially this idea of something called heart rate reserve, which is a percentage of kind of, we calculate this using your resting heart rate and your max heart rate, that a percentage of, we can use your heart rate to calculate some percentage of max that closely approximates your percentage of VO2 max. Okay. And this is why we can look at what your heart rate is during exercise and tell you, okay, you need to be at such and such heart rate in order for it to be a moderate intensity exercise bout. You need it to be at this for it to be a vigorous intensity bout. And we'll do a lot more with that when we get into prescribing exercises, but I'll just like to introduce it here. Okay. So I told you guys all of this. And now I'm going to tell you how this is actually laid out by the American College of Sports Medicine and the CDC. And it's not exactly going to relate to these kinds of things, which I know is going to be weird, but I'll bring it back together for you guys. Okay. The way that our guidelines and the way we arrive at the 150 and the 75 is laid out on something called a metabolic equivalent, or a MET, an MET. Okay. 1 MET represents your resting metabolic rate. So you're just laying in bed, like Madison is doing right now, or like I think Megan was doing earlier. You're just laying there. You're not doing anything. You're kind of dozing off. You're going to take a nap or whatever. You're just there. Okay. Your resting metabolic rate is how much energy does my body have to expend basically to just lay here and be a slug. Okay. In most of you, if we quantify that, okay, and we normalize it to your body weight, okay, it works out to be something that is approximately 3.5 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute. Now, this number is not going to mean anything to you guys right now. It will later on, okay? So 1 MET is your resting rate. If we normalize everybody's resting rate to your body weight, they all tend to kind of pan out at right about this area, okay? So 1 MET is 3.5 mLs per kg per minute. When we want to quantify as something light, moderate, or vigorous, we look at how much does it raise your energy expenditure above rest. And so when we do that, we're going to say, okay, 2 metabolic equivalents is twice your resting metabolic rate. So if we had Kyle get up and start doing some jumping jacks, okay, and we say you need to be at 2 METs, then if we were measuring his oxygen consumption, it would go from 3.5 to 7, okay? That would be 2 METs. So generally, light intensity physical activity is quantified as anything that is less than 3 metabolic equivalents. So it's over rest, so it is physical activity, but it is not costing you any more than 3 metabolic equivalents. You've not raised it more than 3 times your resting rate. Anything that is basically slow walking and under is probably light intensity activity. Okay, light intensity activity. So that tends to work out to be about 10.5 mLs per kg per minute of VO2. Okay, so most of you guys, you know, you get up, you walk around, you're going to be over that. Moderate intensity activity generally is going to be from 3 METs to 6 METs. So from an increase in energy expenditure from 3 to 6 times your resting metabolic rate. For most people, that's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of kind of walking at a relatively brisk pace, okay? Somewhere between, say, 3 and 4 miles per hour, right? Anything above that, all right? So 6 metabolic equivalents is about what that's going to be like 21 mLs per kg per minute. Most of you guys have a max VO2 of, I don't know, somewhere around 35 or 40 or 50. And so moderate intensity stuff like walking is rarely going to be more than like half of your VO2 max, okay? So this is what we consider moderate. So anything that's like that. So you can do moderate on the bike or on the elliptical. You just need to stay kind of in kind of this range. Stuff where your breathing has gone up, but it's not really gone up very much. Okay. Vigorous intensity activity is anything over 6. Okay. Walking very, very fast, jogging, running, okay, things of that nature. Anything really over like 21 mLs per kg per minute normalized to body weight is going to be that. That's how we have laid these things out, okay? So if we look at all of this, we assume that what you need to get health benefits is you need somewhere between 500 and 1,000, what we call MET minutes per week of exercise or a physical activity. So if you need 500, if I need 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity, okay? If we split this right in the middle, we say I need 4.5 METs, right, for 150 minutes. I'm doing some math here in my head. 150 times 4.5, that gets me 675 MET minutes of activity per week, okay? If I'm doing vigorous intensity activity, okay, let's just do vigorous intensity. Let's call it 7, and I multiply that by 75 minutes. That gets me 520 MET minutes. So you can see from all of this how we have in some ways arrived at trying to clear this 500 MET minute thing. And that if you do that, it requires a longer period of time being done at these lower work rates. And so that's kind of where we want to be with all of this stuff. Okay, that's how this has come from. If anybody wants, I'm happy to share. I have a document that has a bunch of different activities and it has their MET equivalent values on it. If you're curious about what all of those things are. Okay. Okay. So here's what we're going to do for Monday. Okay. You guys are going to turn in 2 things for me on Monday. 2 things. And I'll put this in an announcement on Canvas. There's not going to be an official place to turn them in on Canvas, okay? I want you to bring them to class, okay? And you will turn them in physically to me in class on Monday, assuming that I am able to come. If any of you guys can't make it on Monday and you're not going to be there, then I will take it via email. Your 2 things are, okay? 1, you're going to fill out your get to know me sheet that's on Canvas, and you're going to bring that to me, okay? I think it says like personal info or get to know me sheet, but it's going to say on the modules on Canvas, there's a module that says assignments, and then it should be right there. Print that off, okay? Fill it out, bring it to me. It's going to ask you for information about yourself, some unique facts. It's also going to ask you if there are topics that you would like for me to cover in bro science. Are there things that you want to know more about? Okay. What's the deal with CrossFit? Okay. What's the deal? Why is Orange Theory always measuring my heart rate? And what is the orange zone and the green zone and the red zone? And what are those things, right? What about this pre-workout? What about the wrap that we put on, right? What are your friends and you doing to try to prepare for spring break, right? When you're like, oh gosh, I'm going to the beach, right? We know how all of this goes. So put some stuff there. I'll try to cull through those and find some that are interesting, and we'll do those things. Conversely, if you just want to find things on TikTok every day and share one of those with me, we did that 3 semesters ago. We had a girl in class and she would just pull up whatever she'd found on TikTok that day and we'd show it in class and then we talk about it. I'm happy to do that too. Okay. You owe me that. You also are going to owe me, keep track of all physical activity over the next 4 days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Okay. Keep a journal, and I want you to write out what was your activity, how long did you do that activity, so time, and I want you to guess at what you think the MET value was. Was it light intensity? Was it moderate? Was it vigorous? Okay. So based upon those guidelines, if it is sort of slow walking or under, it's light. If it seems kind of walking at a relatively brisk pace, great, we're going to call it moderate. And if it's sort of something that's like jogging or better, we're going to call that vigorous. Some of you should ask me now, Dr. Black, how do we quantify what happens with resistance training? Is resistance training light, moderate, or vigorous? Anybody want to guess? Okay, we'll leave that hanging out there. We'll revisit that on Monday. Okay, we'll revisit that on Monday. But that's what I want you to do. Bring those things with you to class on Monday, and I will see you guys then. Okay, I appreciate you all being good sports and sharing some info today, and so many of you guys having your cameras on and all of that. And I will sign off class like we'll do every Wednesday, which is, I want you guys to have a good weekend. Be safe out there, make good choices, okay, with everything that it is that you're going to do. And with that, I bid you adieu. All right, and I'll try to get this and the other things up on the YouTube channel in the next couple of days. You've got it to review.